Welcome back. Now, the assault on two drivers on the N1 highway by members of the South African Police Service's VIP Protection Unit has raised concerns over the unit's threat to motorists. The incident spread like wildfire on social media, showing members of the Deputy President's Protection Units assaulting three civilians. To share some thoughts on the Blue Lights Bullies, we are now joined by author and witness columnist Bhekisisa Mncube. Thank you so much for your time and thanks for coming to studio. I said to you off air, interesting color of shirt that you wore. It's blue if no one could see. But thank you for your time. It's a very worrying story. I remember seeing it on social media and I could not believe it. I think I watched that video like over 20 times, trying to understand what was going on. Firstly, what did you make of the way these civilians were treated?
Well, it was very scary because I had forgotten all about how these guys they behave on the highways, because since COVID, one is you're still stuck in the house, you work in the house, you really don't encounter them on the road. But the minute I saw that video, and the first time I didn't see the heavy weapons, I just saw pistols, the small ones, and the kicking but when people started talking about heavily armed, I was like, what are they talking about? And I looked at the video again, and I realized that it was actually worse than what I initially thought. The worst part is that in terms of the standing police orders, one of the things police must do is to save lives. So they were supposed to telephone an ambulance once they had beaten them up. I know it sounds funny, but the police, their job is to save lives. They just left them there. Got back into their car and left. There is no suggestion anywhere that their lives were at risk. It seems like these were defenseless people from what we have seen, and they've had a week now to come out with a better story. We don't have that story.
Yes, I mean, I've just seen an article on News 24 that in fact they are reporting that the Deputy President was in fact in the car. But even if he was in the car, that doesn't give the impression, and what South Africans are saying, it doesn't necessarily give them the right to treat people like that. I mean, you speak of the heavy weapons, but also the assault. If somebody is in the way, and we do know that we have to move out of the way, they're carrying a very important person, we understand that, but surely that's not the way to handle the situation, to actually physically start removing people out of the car and start beating them and kicking them.
We have been practicing this thing of how to carry VIPs for 29 years now. We have almost perfected the art, right? We know that the unit gets more money than the Hawks, which is quite concerning. But there is no reason to believe that the life of the Deputy President or any person who might have been in that car was at risk. Because the people who were being assaulted, they were obviously not armed. And we know that they were dragged out of the car. We know that attempts were made to actually hit the front mirror of the car without success. It's horrible. And then the fact that they've been suspended is not enough. Criminal charges should follow.
Yeah. I want to ask you about your experience at all, if you've had a terrible encounter with the Blue Light Brigade, if I can call them that. I think every South African has. I mean, when I see them, I literally start panicking because I know I need to get out of the way, and quite frankly, they become bullies on the road because they need you to move, but it's obviously done in a way that you need to move now.
It's very scary. It happened quite a while back in 2005. I was a senior political journalist at the Witness newspaper in Pietermaritzburg. And when you're a political reporter, you think you're invisible because you can pick up a phone and call the Premier, and the Premier will answer your call. So I was on the high, and something I always wanted to do political reporting. And then I went to attend a cabinet meeting. The first time that a cabinet meeting was outside of the cabinet room. So we were quite excited to be outside the cabinet room and to get to see what's going to happen. We're told that the ANC was going to have the first provincial growth strategy since they took over the power in KwaZulu-Natal. So it was an important cabinet meeting. And then I tried my best to get my hands on the actual provincial growth strategy, including trying to speak to people who had access to the cabinet room to say, hey, whatever it takes, get me that document. Obviously, it failed, because in South Africa now I know, you just don't get cabinet documents, you know. They are guarded secret. And then I noticed that there was more than the crowd that was there, was just more than the journalist. I was like, oh yeah, of course there has to be security. And then, but I was like, there's just too many of us. It made no sense. So then I realized that it was the VIP protection unit, that the numbers had been tripled on that day because a cabinet meeting was happening in a public area. So I counted until I stopped at about 100 of them,
Sure.
guarding 10 MECs and 1 premier. And then because I thought, okay, if you can't get the big story that we all wanted in the newsroom, then there's another story of over 100 men guarding only 11 people. So I went back to the newsroom. I was very happy with myself. Woke up the next morning. I hit the front page. You know what happens when we hit the front page in the newsroom. And so it was, I know it was Thursday, because then there was a sitting at the KwaZulu-Natal legislature. And then off I went to the sitting in the morning. I was very happy with myself. And, you know, and the minute I was just about to enter the KwaZulu-Natal legislature for the sitting, suddenly these men with guns, just out of nowhere, I mean, I hadn't noticed that they were around there. I just heard the voice that said, it's him, he's here. And then they rushed towards me, and they started manhandling me and saying, how dare you break ranks like that? You are not supposed to report about security. You threaten the life of the premier. And it was bad. And I could see that it was going to degenerate quite quickly. Until one of them shouted that, hey, wrong guy, man. He just had a bad day. He's one of the good guys. I don't even know what that meant. But it turned out it's someone that, because I had been hanging around politicians throughout my reporting, is someone who knew me and decided that the idea of assaulting me outside the perimeter of the legislature was not really a viable option. And it wasn't just the threat of violence that was imminent. It was to think that you are going to suffer the consequences of your journalism outside a place that holds so much promise for our democracy, a legislature. You know, it's something you can't even imagine. And they were prepared to do that in the presence of their bosses in the chamber, just across about a few meters away.
Yes.
They were not perturbed.
I can just imagine how traumatic that was for you, but it speaks to the realities of what many are going through and what those 3 individuals in that car were going through as well. I want to speak about repercussions and whether or not you think, I know you mentioned the fact that, you know, a suspension is not enough, but many are concerned that this is just going to die under, nothing is going to be made about it. They're hoping maybe that we all forget about what actually happened. But that force of violence that was used is very worrying. I mean, even if they were not moving out of the way, what do you think the repercussions should actually be, and are there going to be any repercussions?
Well, they lack something that is required in policing, the emotional stability. Because you're carrying weapons and that are likely to end a life, you are supposed to behave much better than I will behave if I felt threatened. They are taught something about the proportionality of the response to the threat. So the lesser the threat, then less violence must be emitted out. What they did shows that they don't belong to that unit. They should be somewhere in a police station, taking out statements and making photocopies. I mean, that's where they belong, with that kind of attitude. I was happy the other day that this station was reporting that someone is prepared to take their case further, but they should face criminal charges. That type of assault is assault with intention to cause grievous bodily harm. So it's not just a common assault, a slap in the face because you are standing in the way.
I've completely run out of time, I'm sorry, but I have to ask you one last question about what do you think the Deputy President should do about this? Because they released a statement, they confirmed that indeed it was his VIP protection. Of course, we're going to have to definitely confirm what News 24 is reporting about whether or not he was in that vehicle. But having protection like that, that's so violent and that clearly caused a lot of damage to these civilians. As the Deputy President, what should he be doing and saying?
He should be distancing himself completely from these fellows, irrespective of what happens departmentally in their disciplinary hearing, irrespective of what happens in terms of criminal charges. They must not be part of his detail because they have behaved like gangsters. And as you're starting out as a Deputy President, you don't want that as part of your PR that has gone out anyway since he became Deputy President. So you don't want to add to those woes. No. So they must go and work in the police station like normal police officers would do photocopies.
Just out of curiosity, did you stop being a political reporter after that incident?
It's a strange thing. I became a government official.
Oh, goodness.
And then at some stage I was traveling in Jozini, in KwaZulu-Natal, on my way back to Durban. And I saw this guy I knew with a blue light, and he motioned that I should follow him. So he escorted me from Jozini in KwaZulu-Natal for 600 kilometers. So I know how it feels like to be escorted.
Oh my goodness, as long as you don't bully anybody. Thank you so much for coming to studio and speaking to us about your experience and that issue. That was author and witness columnist Bhekisisa Mncube speaking to us about what he went through with the so-called Blue Light Brigade.